27. Shadow. Lights. Pain. Voices. Hands. Cold. When he regained consciousness, he was being dragged through a hallway. He couldn't quite keep his eyes open, let alone talk, but all he could think of was the look in Midia's eyes as they breathed what they thought was their last. He craned his neck all around, trying to see where she was. All he could make out were another set of footsteps. He hoped that meant she was being dragged along too. Before long, they stopped before some glowing red wall of some kind. It was bright glowing red, and transparent like glass, but it didn't seem all there. Suspended between two strange pillars with more of the glowing green lines he associated with Regan technology. He was cruelly dropped to the floor, and footsteps walked to the wall, and in a moment it was gone.
"Get in, filth,"
a familiar honey-toned voice said, though this time his voice was filled with acid. A strong kick to his ribs pushed him in. Another kick, and a pained grimace, this time Midia's voice, and she was dumped next to him. In a moment, the red wall went back up. From down here it seemed to be some kind of thing made of light, or electricity.
"You two get comfortable. I have a war to win, but once the world is mine, you two are going to be my new little toys. There's still so much left to learn about all this technology, and you're going to help me in my experiments. And now, nothing stands in my way. I'll never help you."
Chesney managed, still too weak to even pick himself up off the floor. Zagos laughed then, and walked away with those that had carried them.
"Still so naive. This is going to be fun."
His laughter, and the echoes of his footsteps soon grew too distant and faint to hear, and they were left alone and in silence. His body ached everywhere, and his arms and legs felt so cold. A headache was brewing, and the constant hum of the red wall, or field of light, was becoming grating. But beyond that, there was something else he noticed. His head wasn't just sore, but there was something missing. Something he couldn't immediately place. Groaning, he sat up, disgusted to find that his clothes were unchanged, and soaked through with his blood. He touched his chest where the sword had impaled him, finding a ragged scar. Midia whimpered as she uncoiled herself from the heap she'd fallen in. Her clothes were just as drenched in blood, and a large hole in the middle of her shirt exposed a similar scar.
"My head feels weird. Whoa, check it out, Chen,"
a voice said quietly behind them. It was dry and scratchy, with a clacking quality to it.
"Is that a couple of kids? Wait, are these those two little fighters that took on Lokiorn?"
Another voice joined in the conversation, this one sounding more normal.
"Whoa, no way. I can't believe they made it. Bad luck for these two, though, being stuck in here. Who knows what Zagos has planned for M. Here, help me get them up, and go get your blanket,"
the rougher voice said. The children turned to find a black and gray Rakgorn dressed in rags, along with a lean Fiorla man. The Fiorla had a missing ear, and the familiar bright green forehead plate most Fiorla seemed to have, and a goatee. The two approached them with open hands to show they meant no harm, and helped the children to their feet. They wrapped them each in dirty, threadbare blankets, and passed them each a shallow cup with some water in it tea. Though Chesney could guess, he still had to ask,
"Where are we?"
The Rakgorn replied in his odd clacking voice,
"You're in Zagos' special prison. This is where he puts people he finds useful. Anyone else usually gets shipped off to a work camp. Oh, I'm a tug, by the way. This guy is Chen."
Chesney looked down at his chest.
"How, though? I thought we were, you know."
At the mention of it, Midia drew her blanket closer around herself and held her knees even tighter, looking away. Chesney noticed, and wondered how she was taking all this. Not well, it would seem.
"How are you alive? Are you kidding? This place is filled with the craziest things I've ever seen."
Chen, the Fiorla, said,
"Test subjects wouldn't be very useful if they broke easily. He's got devices that have brought back people I thought were long gone. Whether it's lucky he used it on you two, I don't know. But you're alive, at least. Oh yeah, we're real lucky.
It was Medea who said it, but Chesney's heart broke to hear her say it. Her voice was filled with so much bitterness and defeat. It reminded him far too much of how Joyce's death had affected her. Was he really any better off, though? He really didn't know. Nothing seemed real yet. He was still just understanding he was alive. His body felt so wrong. Somehow over the weeks, that feeling of being unworthy of Cormús things had faded, and now that they were gone, he felt so incomplete. That familiar weight on his shoulders, that heaviness in the grip of the sword, the stifling closeness of the helm. Without them, he was small again. But that feeling of wrongness went beyond even that. They had failed. There was no one left to rescue them. And really, even if they did escape, what then? Dahlgren, Neugren, both had been activated. He no longer had the only thing that could even hope to destroy them. The world would be crushed into sand under the heels of Zagos, his creation, and came at before long. It had already started. Who knew how much longer Nasquat had? And then, how long until Sasquatch was destroyed? Still, he had to say something. He felt empty, but he was used to that feeling, seeing Medea barely holding herself together. Of all the terrible things, that was the one thing he could never endure. Softly, softly, he moved his hand and just touched it to her knee. She breathed in sharply and jerked.
Sorry,
he said lamely.
How are you doing? I.
She swallowed and hid her face. Her voice took on that quality of a voice that strained to be heard through a heart choked with hurt. Like it was just a struggle to speak instead of break down into something incoherent and mournful.
I really can't take any more. I just can't do it.
Her hand came up and it trembled in front of her face.
I can't hear it anymore. I can't feel light. I can't see the world like sand. I know I'm not alone, but I just feel so.
She couldn't finish it, and let out a single sob. The Racorn said,
Yeah, this whole room is made specifically to suppress spiritualists. Sorry, kids.
That was it. That was what was missing before, that familiar feeling now absent. Fire was gone. They all were. Replaced with a maddening, droning buzz. He pulled out his own hand and tried to push out even a single candle flame's worth of fire from his finger, but nothing. Medea stood and quickly walked to a corner, away from everyone. She didn't make much noise beyond some hiccups, but her shoulders shook and it was clear she was crying. Chen looked at her with sincere pity.
You guys. I don't know how you got this far, but that was incredible what you tried to do out there. We could just barely see it through there.
He pointed to a barred window high up on the wall.
Way better than what landed me in here. Someone overheard me complaining about Zagos and bam, here I am. How stupid. I refused to do work at the camp, so they shipped me off here,
Matug said. After that, the pair of prisoners tried to engage Chesney with some conversation, but it was soon clear that he just didn't have anything left in him right then. Chesney's eyes never left Medea. For hours he watched her quietly cry, all alone, not knowing what to do, or say. The silence stretched on, and on, and on. She'd always been so strong and proud. How many times had she told him how much she believed in him? How many times had she picked him up and told him things were going to work out? What had she been feeling then? What was she feeling now? She looked so utterly heartbroken. It almost took him down, too. But for how many times she had saved him, this time, it was his turn to save her. He just had no idea how. Everything he thought to say sounded stupid and trite and useless, insulting even. Things had never been darker. What hope could be found in this place? Still, he had to try. He had to do something. He stood and walked. Not really anywhere. Just to walk, and stretch his legs, stretch his mind. He found himself at the gate, a hand pressed against the field, feeling the static push him back. What could he say to connect with her? What would reach her like this? The more he thought about it, a memory came to his mind. Her peaceful face, humming, and smiling, and writing in her little journal. She'd been writing a song, that was it. It was so important to her that their voices were heard, in their own words. Gods damn it, why hadn't he listened to her more that day? What was so important then that he had mostly ignored her and walked in silence? Had it made her feel lonely, that she was doing it all on her own? He spun what he could remember over in his mind, desperately hunting for the words, even the tune. Everything was a blur or half-remembered. But the more he thought, the more he remembered of the general feel of how it had gone. Maybe that was it. Maybe if he... His fingers tapped a rhythm on the field to how the syllables should go. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't remember how the song started. But maybe he could say what he needed to say anyway. He played with his words in his mind, fit them together and tore them apart over and over. This kind of thing wasn't his strong suit, at all. But maybe it didn't really matter if it was. Maybe just trying was enough. He hoped so. Things were too dark to feel embarrassed, but still his uncertain and unpracticed voice cracked and shook as he sung his first bar. Once again, we, dark and lonely, just sit and wait to die. The war is over, all is hopeless. We laid our weapons down and I'm so empty. I feel broken. There's nothing left for me to give. When all I want is just an ending. How can I tell her? Try to live? It hadn't been good. His voice couldn't stay stable, and it would crack and go quiet. And near the end, it had been so hard to say the last line without his throat clamping shut from the emotion. Worse yet, while he could sort of remember how the chorus tune went, he didn't remember enough of the words to really try to continue it. Heartbeats ticked by like moments. With each one, his heart broke just a little bit more. She'd helped him so many times. Why couldn't he be the one to help her, just once? His mind was still swimming with that awful emptiness, but just then, he didn't care. There had to be a way out. He focused, and though he didn't feel that familiar warmth or darting through the darkness, he pretended to. Moved his thoughts around as though he did. He pressed his mind, tried to offer up his precious life and push the energy into his hand, but in the end he felt nothing, and in anger he resorted to just punching the wall as hard as he could. I'll save you, no matter what, Medea. I swear it, no matter what I have to do. But, there, so weakly he could barely hear it over his own pounding heart, she sang back, haltingly, quietly, like she didn't know how to use her own voice. Like just the energy for this was almost too much. Can't we just be 13? Why did we have to make a stand? When do we get to just be kids? When do we get to have our chance? His heart leapt. He turned to see her. She had sat back against the wall, looking up at the ceiling like it had any answers for her. Her face was still so shadowed and pale. Her eyes were red, and her cheeks wet with tears. He could tell that even opening up her heart to this hope was painful. But she did it. Was it for herself? Was it for him? It didn't matter. Then, she surprised him. She continued on. Was it how the lyrics had been originally? He didn't know. But they fit, and he felt them. But in this darkness, I still feel it. A tiny flame within my heart. With each new heartbeat, each new breath, begging me to make a start. She stood up, and continued, her steps keeping time with the bars, and she sang just a little bit faster, and joined him at the wall. She still sounded so heartbroken, but there was the promise of mending within her song, too. When all we have left is each other. Tomorrow's not a dirty word. Our future isn't set in stone yet. Our story's not yet heard. There was magic in this moment. He was sure that what she was singing now wasn't how things had gone before, but it was like he could tell where her mind was going. His unsure lips, somehow mouthing the words as she sang them. When she reached the wall, she drew back and punched it as hard as she could, too. daring the field to try to stand and defy her. It didn't move at all, but at that moment it didn't matter. They had to try. Her voice rose in energy, and without even meaning to, he followed her lines a half a bar behind her, and together they punched and shoved and kicked the wall. So, when can we be 13? Just let us be 13. I want to hold your hand. I want to hold your hand. I want to gaze in your eyes. I want to gaze in your eyes. And you to lift me up and dance. And I'll lift you up and dance. She reached over and took his hand, and it was like holding on to a live wire. Power shot through them in equal measure, and though it was faint, it was like he could hear the spirits within him scratching and shouting to rejoin him. Without even needing to think, they both thrust their hands forward and shot massive bolts of lightning into the field. It screeched and wavered, but held strong.
Rambling rock slide. How in the world did they do that?
The ragged Rakgorn said, standing up in amazement.
I have no idea, but maybe we actually do stand a chance. Come on,
Chen said, getting up himself and body slamming into the field as the children attacked it with their lightning. Half a second behind him, Matug joined in. Midia's eyes danced, and she smiled at the familiar feeling of her spirits once more. She nodded to Chesney, and they renewed their attacks, and her voice rang out clear and filling moment to moment with confidence. Escape this prison. We'll find freedom. Our shining hearts will light our way. We'll turn this darkness into daylight. We'll live to see another day. Together, we'll rewrite our story. We'll break these chains. We'll rise above. Nothing in this world can stop us. Not when I'm with the boy I love. The field was buckling and flickering. The air was filling with the smell of ozone and burnt electronics. With everything all four of them had, they punched and kicked and blasted and shoved. It wasn't easy calling upon their magic, but as powerful as they were, it no longer mattered. They would be leaving this cell. Now. And we'll be 13. We'll stand up hand in hand. We'll save the world together. And we'll make our final stand. Sparks were flying out of the pillars on either side as the field struggled to remain unbroken. But the more in sync the two of them got, the stronger their connection to their magic became. Chesney switched up from using bolt to hammering the field with his fists, using devastating break attacks each time. We'll finally be 13. The dreams that light our hearts. We'll finally be just kids. And we'll never be apart. The field was stretching further and further out, like a balloon getting more and more overfull, ready to burst. They pushed into it, pushing and shoving, and breaking it more and refusing to let it snap back into place. At last, a high-pitched whine followed by a series of loud cracks, and then the field collapsed. Surprised, they all fell forward, where they caught themselves.
Chen, I can't believe it,
Matug said, almost in a whisper.
We did it. No, those kids. How in the world?
As soon as the field was down, Midia spun towards Chesney, and he picked her up in his arms, whirling her around and around.
I can't believe you remembered my song. I'm so sorry I shut down. Chesney, I never stopped believing in you. I was just so hurt.
He pulled her close and pressed his forehead to her cheek.
No, you don't ever have to apologize for something like that. Don't you know how many times you've been there for me, and picked me up when all I wanted to do was give up? No, you dummy, don't you see? You never give up. That's why I love you. There are times you don't see just how strong you are, but every time you look at me I just know it's all going to be okay. And thank you for reminding me why I keep fighting. What do you mean? I want to be with you, and do normal kid things. I want to go on dates. I want you to walk me home at night. I want to look at the stars with you, and feel normal and small again. And I want you to hold me in your arms and you.
There was a clearing of a throat behind them, back in the cell. With a shocked gasp, they spun, only to find Fiery there, leaning against a wall, with a wall panel neatly set to the side next to a narrow passageway.
Well, I feel a bit silly,
she said.
Fiery,
Medea exclaimed, shouting incredulously and leaping away from Chesney unconsciously.
How long have you been there?
She tilted her head.
Well, I think since about, not when I'm with the boy I love.
She sang the last bit in her best impression of a love-struck damsel. Medea's face turned the brightest pink, then she turned and buried her face in Chesney's chest.
Ugh, why do things like this keep happening? You, what are you doing here, anyway?
Chesney asked, patting Medea consolingly on the head. Fiery winked.
Secret mission, remember? You two getting captured wasn't exactly the plan, but since this was the big one, we wanted to cover all our bases. Now, are you two okay? Follow me. I've got a full medical team with me.
Bewildered, the four of them followed Fiery through the hole she came out of, where there were a number of people waiting in another hallway, where a few dead guards were bleeding out on the floor. There was a medical team there, with a full set of surgeons' tools and medicines they'd never seen before. While they looked the children over, the group talked.
I appreciate you coming to rescue us, but please tell me you have all our stuff. I don't know if you saw what happened up there, but we couldn't even scuff up Lokiaran's shoes, let alone destroy Noigrin.
Chesney said. Fiery's head lowered a bit, and her eyes grew very pained like she was fighting something within herself.
Oh yes, I saw.
She shook her head, and gestured to some bags, splattered with fresh blood.
Well, we got most of it, but not Cormouth's things.
Chesney cursed, and clawed his fingers through his hair. Damn it! We missed our chance. Medea, nearby and holding her hair up so the doctor could check the wound in her back, said,
Chesney, it will be okay. We'll have to go and find them and come back. We'll storm the gates if we have to. As long as we're alive, we can try again.
Fiery held up her hands.
Oh, don't worry. We won't have to go far.
She pointed up.
Zagos is having his researchers studying them in labs up in the upper levels, which is also conveniently in the direction of Noigrin. Wait, are you serious? Why didn't you lead with that?
Chesney said, standing to his feet so fast he almost knocked the doctor away.
Who knows what they're doing to them? We need to hurry, now. Hold on. Doctor, how are they?
The doctor nodded grimly.
They're in about as good shape as they could be expected to be. Their bodies are showing stress from all the repeated breaks, and it looks like these scars are permanent.
Fiery sighed.
I mean, can they fight?
The doctor threw up his hands.
Yes, they can fight. I have no idea what medical facilities Zagos has here in this little fortress of his, but it did a better job than I could have hoped to do. You kids are lucky to be alive after that slaughter out there. Before you go rushing off to your deaths, though, here, let us fill your bottles at least.
Him and his staff took a few moments to refill all their medicines. It also helped them to do inventory. They had 1 bottle of anticetamol, 3 bottles of minicetamol, 3 bottles of ibuprofen, and 1 B.O.M.B. bottle. The pair of them clipped a bottle of ibuprofen to their belts, and re-equipped themselves as much as possible. Chesney was still completed, unarmed, and aside from his shield, unarmored.
Guess for now, I'm going to have to stay out of the line of fire,
he said. He felt so awkward and exposed without his equipment, but there was a pull there too. Knowing that his things were close, it was like some kind of gravity was tugging at him. He needed them back, more than anything.
On that note,
Fiery said,
let me introduce you to Blades.
She gestured to a youthful-looking Dora man with a roguish smile. He had shining silver hair, some of it curling over his face, and the rest in a long ponytail. His hair even covered his long ears and very short hairs, making him look like he had cute furry animal ears. His clothes were sharp and well-fitted, a lavender-colored collared shirt and dark gray slacks. The man bowed easily and introduced himself.
My name is Blades, famed genius mercenary of Lennis. I'm sure you've heard of me, but if you haven't, know that I'm always digging this one out of all the trouble she finds herself in. I normally charge new clients a lot higher than this, but for friends of Fiery, it will be 2,000 gold.
Midia's expression, which had been morphing from surprise and appraising to sour in about 3 seconds, turned to Fiery.
Wait, you brought a mercenary along and now we have to pay him too?
She winced.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I kind of had to run around like a headless bird and made a lot of people a lot of promises. Blades here agreed to help us get in, but anything else was extra, and frankly I'm running on fumes here.
Chesney turned to the stylish man and asked,
Okay, quick rundown. What can you do? So glad you asked. I'm an absolute demon with this bad boy,
he said, whipping out a morning star.
Aside from that, I've mastered sky and water, with a little bit of air mixed in there.
Midia did the math.
Okay, so you can do windstorm, warp, escape, break and break group, and defense up. I think we should take him. If only so there's more people who can use defense up, but the added firepower is nice too. Sold,
Chesney said, and counted out the money for the man. He noticed Blades had no shield of any kind, but who was he to tell the man how to protect himself? One of Fiery's soldiers saluted.
Okay, I'll lead the medical team out. Will you be okay? Oh sure, I got Wonder Boy and Thunder Girl here. We're good.
Midia looked at Fiery, her expression lighting up.
Wait, you're coming along this time?
She returned with a big grin and a thumbs up.
Wouldn't miss it, kiddo. Not when I can directly kick Zakos where it really hurts for a change. I may have not slept in days, but I can still kick some ass. This mission is still on. What about us?
They turned to look at Chen and Mattug, having completely forgotten them in all the series of events.
Oh, right. Well if you don't mind hanging with a bunch of resistance members, you can leave with my men.
Fiery offered.
Or,
Chesney added, rolling his shoulders,
if not, if you give us a few minutes head start, some escaped prisoners will be the least of anyone's worries around here. Do you need any more help? I can fight, too,
Chen offered. On second look, his body was lean, but toned like iron. Chesney had no doubt the man was strong enough to do serious damage, but he was completely unarmored, had no spirits of any kind, and only had his fists. Taking him along would just be resigning him to a meaningless death. Midia, thinking the same thing, spoke first.
Chen, we really appreciate the offer, but I don't think it's a good idea. Please, understand.
He nodded.
It's okay, I do understand. Only, I just hate to see you kids having to go off and fight after. Well, after what happened out there.
He could understand that feeling. Not long ago, he felt so hopeless. But now, out of prison, and knowing that his target was close, and his weapons even closer, his body felt electric, like it couldn't wait to move. He could finally see the line from himself to their goal. That feeling of uselessness and pointlessness that had overtaken him only hours ago was gone. Now, at last, he felt like he was right where he needed to be. Almost like this was the only way it could have happened. He looked over to Midia. She was bouncing on her heels, hand gripped tight on her whip. She returned his look. Both of them grinned at the same time. It felt right. We have got this.
Don't worry about us, Chen,
Chesney said finally.
I feel born for this.
A part of him wondered if he very well may have been.
Nothing can stop us. Not now, not ever. I feel it now more than anything,
Midia added. Her heart swelled to see Chesney finally starting to believe in himself the way she always had. At last, everyone parted ways. Chesney took control.
Okay, Midia, Blades, you two stay in front for now. Don't spare anything. We don't have time to dawdle, and we have more than enough ways to sustain our efforts. Pretend Zagos himself is nipping at our heels, because he very well might be. There is only one thing we need to do, destroy Noigren. We can do this. Any questions?
Blades raised his hand.
Does anyone know what this Noigren thing looks like?
Chesney nodded.
I do. I've seen it before. You'll know it when we get there. Now, let's move.
Fiery led them to an elevator.
This is the way up to the first tower and research station. They're all connected and isolated at the same time. Once we're up there, all we have to do is follow the walkways. There's literally only one way to go.
Chesney jabbed the up button inside the car with his fist.
Perfect.
The car began to move, humming quietly.
Heavy resistance up here,
Fiery said, her face a mask of determination.
The guards he trusts to guard his research facilities are completely loyal, and are the elites of the elites.
On the way up, Midia pressed her hands to each of them, and their speed doubled.
With this, we should have no trouble. But, here...
She pressed her hand against Chesney's chest, and a thin layer of water seemed to form over his body, then become invisible.
Just in case. It should protect you a few times. You're the best,
he said, kissing her on the cheek. Then, his face, and his heart, turned to violence. The whir of the elevator filled the silence, but as they rose, he couldn't help but feel the spirits within him itch to be called forth. Fire, light, sky, spirit, water, air, all of them usually like a discordant chaos of school children in a choir which they all sang as they pleased, now waited with bated breath. The elevator slowed, then stopped. The doors slipped open, revealing a guardroom, a handful of Fi-Orla soldiers, a pair of old wizened-looking spiritualists, a Rakgorn, and a heavily armored man with an enormous sword, all turned to look in their direction. The room was fully enclosed, with another door at the other end, the only other way out. All four of them stepped out of the elevator in formation, and then everything erupted. Fiery was right. These weren't like the soldiers that had been at the Helm Temple. These were disciplined, seasoned warriors that worked in a group, and did it well. There were no warnings, or offers of mercy for compliance. In seconds, Midia and Blades were boxed in with 2 soldiers each, and the enemy spiritualists were already waiting for a break in the combat to blast them. Their first battle turned into a knockdown, drag-out slog. With so much pressure, there was no way for most of them to get the room to use magic without risking taking a bad hit. But not everyone. They all rallied in front of Chesney, protecting him at all costs, which let him use his magic with impunity. One by one the soldiers were immolated and blasted away, screaming in agony and flying back into those behind them. Just as things were turning, the heavily armored soldier charged through them all, making straight for him. With a great cry, he swung his greatsword down at Chesney's exposed shoulders, hoping to cut him down in one blow. The strike was like being hit with a club and made him dizzy, but due to the protective barrier Midia had put on him, he was barely harmed. A whip coiled around the soldier's neck and pulled him back before he could try another blow, and in response the large man turned and kicked Midia in the neck, knocking her away before trying to come back and finish the job on Chesney. Incensed at seeing Midia hurt for protecting him, Chesney turned his fist into a claw and slammed it into man's throat. He pushed forward the killing intent needed to use the defeat spell, and the man fell to the ground like a broken doll.
We need to finish this now,
Chesney yelled, and in the next moment, the room was filled with fire, lightning, and a crushing gravitational wave that overtook everyone, and left them silent and unmoving.
Sophie's mercy,
Blades said, taking in the devastation and covering his nose from the smell of burning flesh.
You guys aren't playing around.
Chesney had nothing to say to that.
Let's hope that's the worst of it. That took way too long. Move!
They burst out of the guardhouse to find themselves incredibly high above Zagos' temple. They were on a wide steel and glass walkway with no railings. Midia gasped in shock at the sight, and immediately grabbed for Chesney's arm.
So high.
Oh no, he thought. only just now remembering Midia's terrible fear of heights. Being so high up, and with no handrails, must be terrifying for her. Honestly, it wasn't the best for him either, but the adrenaline of the moment was letting him keep a narrow focus. Her eyes filled with terror as she looked down through the glass walkway. The wind up here was blowing, hard and cold, and her hair blowing like mad in every direction. She swayed dangerously on weak legs. He had to think fast.
Midia! Focus! Look at me, right here.
She tried to keep her gaze fixed on his face.
Use strength on me.
After a moment's hesitation, she pressed a hand to him, and he felt his strength increase.
Okay, close your eyes. I'm going to carry you.
He squatted down and hooked her over his shoulders, letting her hang onto his neck.
I'm so sorry, Chesney. I should be better than this. It's okay. Just keep your eyes closed. Breathe. And calm down. Just say the word when you're ready, and I'll put you down.
She held on tight and nodded, squinting her eyes closed. They moved on over the treacherous walkways. Around them were the 3 great towers that had been built to oversee the whole temple. They were indeed stylized to look like enormous swords, the blades of them cut in a diamond shape and colored pale golden yellow. The hilts, which attached to the walkways, were dark blue, and the handles seemed to contain structures. To his surprise, he counted 6 towers, not 3. Now that he was so close to them, he found that another set of the towers lived in the shadows of the other set. The guard room they'd left being the northeasternmost sword tower, and the path going west to the north middle tower. Fiery was right again. Looking at the walkway, there was no way to go but forward. It touched upon all 6 swords. There were no guards he could see just then walking along the paths, but who knew when that would change? Approaching the middle tower on the north side, there were all kinds of cables and pipes flowing in and out of it.
Blades, you and Fiery go in first. I'll support you,
Chesney said, adjusting Midia so he could use a hand to use magic. The 2 flanked the door, and Blades swiped at a control panel beside the door. It opened, and the pair of them burst through, only to find a room with no one in it.
Well, you don't see something like this every day,
Blades said, looking up. All around them was a bizarre collection of devices, all hooked together with pipes and wire set. Massive spheres of metal with electronic displays, pipes labeled with Reigen characters, valves, and pulsing green light. Chesney looked it over.
This is part of Anuigrin. How can you tell?
Midia asked, a little less scared now that they were inside an enclosed space. He didn't know how to explain. There was an aura of evil here, somehow. Like somehow whatever was powering the device was itself some kind of terrible crime. Stepping into the room had instantly made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end, and every moment he spent here made him feel like something terrible would happen.
I just do. Let's move on. There's nothing we can do here.
They left the room, and the feeling of malice was gone just as quickly. As they walked, he couldn't help but look down to the terrible drop below, and wonder if anyone knew they'd escaped yet. It was obvious enough that something was going on down there, but was it part of the festival Zagos had prepared, or military drills, or maybe a force was assembling just to chase them down? Then he wondered, is Zagos looking up at me right now? The idea instantly sent a rush of fear through him. We need to run. His pace quickened to reach the northwesternmost tower. Please, be in here, he begged the universe. Just as they were approaching the door, a trio of elite soldiers in crimson armor walked out. They stared at each other in surprise for several seconds, before the soldiers unsheathed their swords and rushed them. Blades said, face completely impassive. He swung his morning star right at the grip of the man's sword, crushing his fingers. The sword dropped to the ground as the soldier screamed. Taking advantage of the surprise, Blades kicked the man over before stepping on his chest and smashing in his skull.
You should always introduce yourselves, you know. Makes things much more sporting.
Midia, through squinting eyes, blasted out a break spell that knocked the nearest assailant off his feet, while Fiery easily dodged a swing from the third one. then grabbed a thin needle-like dagger and jabbed the man's neck through an exposed joint. In a second, he stopped cold as if he couldn't move, and fell over near the edge. The one Medea had blasted was still getting up, until blades came easily up from behind him and snapped his fingers. A wave of broken reality slammed him to the ground, making the walkway tremble just a bit. Medea yelped in surprise and fear, holding on to Chet's knee tighter. The tremble on the walkway also knocked the man Fiery had poisoned just enough that he tipped over the edge and fell. They all watched as the soldier twirled and fell down, and splattered red all over the pure white building far below.
Yeah, that's not good. I think we'd better hurry,
Blade said at last. He swiped the panel beside the door, and they all entered to find a room filled with men and women in shiny suits or pure white clothes, all near displays.
I told you three, keep out of the way,
one grumpy-sounding Fiorla man said without turning him. He was standing in front of a clear glass tube, inside of which was Cormu's sword. Finally! His arm ached to feel it again, and Chesney put Medea down. She took a breath and uncoiled her whip. Fiery stood beside her, holding a blowgun, while Blades walked forward with Chesney.
Give me the sword, now,
Chesney said.
And nobody has to get hurt. What? I told you this research will take at Leah.
The man began to shout while turning, only to stammer as soon as he saw who had actually entered the room. The other people, presumably also researchers, turned to see them and instantly fell to their knees in shock.
Give me the sword. I'm not going to ask again,
Chesney said, coldly, and his hand burst into flames to make his point. Blades leaned on the table next to the researcher who had spoken. There was blood splattered on his face, and his mace was dripping.
You know, I think I'd listen if I were you. Kid seems pretty serious, you know? But what about Zagos? What will he do to us?
The man stammered, looking all over the room and finding no one to support him. His eyes were drawn to the large bloodstains covering Chesney and Medea, and paled. Blade shrugged.
Hey, what can I say? Some days you just don't get to make a good choice.
With a trembling hand, the man pressed a button beside him, and backed away towards his colleagues with hands up. The glass cylinder slid away. Now that it was in front of him, it was like his body couldn't wait to claim it once more. His fingers wrapped around the hilt, and his emotions cooled and evened out. Suddenly, everything really felt possible again. He pulled it back and inspected the blade, searching for any damage, but of course there was none. The navy blue organic-looking hilt and shining white blade were just as timeless and awe-inspiring as they had been when he first saw it. But that ominous feeling of power and responsibility no longer felt like such an awful weight.
Feeling better?
Medea asked, moving to stand beside him. He let out a long sigh.
Yeah, I really am.
When Zagos had cornered them, Medea had a front row seat in seeing just how fragile Chesney could be. Behind all the hard decisions he had to make, and the power he wielded, he was still a hurt little boy crushed under the weight of mistakes he never intended to make. And maybe he always would be. But seeing the brave boy isolated, ridiculed, disarmed, it gave her something to focus on in that moment, other than her own terror, that she could do all in her power to support him when he needed it when all else was against him. But of all the terrible things Zagos had done, crushing the boy she loved right in front of her was somehow the worst of them all. Seeing all his growth wiped away and their hard journey reduced to nothing. She was so proud that despite all that, he still managed to hold on to hope, and move on. And now, with sword in hand, he looked somehow complete again, like he had been missing his arm and some miracle had given it back to him.
You can do this. I believe in you. I know. I really believe that, too. Let's go.
Chesney bent down to a knee to pick her up again, but she shook her head.
And no, I think I'll be fine. Just, let me put a hand on you while we go.
As they left the cowering scientists behind, Fiery looked back the way they had come and said,
Looks like we got company.
They looked to the east, at the first sword tower they had departed from, to find a handful of soldiers piling out. They made eye contact and started running.
Run!
Chesney grabbed Midia's hand.
Time is officially up. We need to move.
There were still 3 towers left to explore, and only one direction to go in, so they ran. Just rounding the corner around the next tower saw another 2 soldiers, and a much tougher-looking one in thick plate armor.
I'll take the big guy,
Chesney yelled.
You got it, boss. I'll take the one on the right,
Blade said, flipping his weapon as he ran. His eyes were alight. This was his element. Without breaking stride, Blade swiped his weapon and an arc of distortion shot out, severing the sword arm of his foe. His foe disarmed. Blades took another swipe with his weapon, knocking the man clean off. Chesney rushed past the soldier on the left. Just as the soldier turned, he was blasted in the face with a massive bolt of lightning from Midia, leaving his head a smoking ruin. With a leap, Chesney descended with a strong overhead blow. The heavy sword user easily brought up his sword to block the blow, but it didn't matter. Cormu's sword sliced clean through, and the man's neck was cleaved from his body.
Sophie's mercy. That's ridiculous,
Blade shouted, seeing the impossible display.
Where do I get one? He pulled it out of a dragon, so I guess step 1 would be finding one of those,
Midia said, giving Blades a wink as she rushed by.
That is so not fair.
They rounded the corner and swiped at the panel to open the door, and 2 of Zagos's assassins popped out, clawed hands at the ready. One hand struck Chesney in the chest, and the force was great enough to almost puncture the skin, but while he felt the wave of energy, this time, he was not felled. Blades caught the other one with his weapon, and kicked his assailant back into the room.
Let's see how you like it,
Chesney yelled, letting his free hand turn into the familiar clawed strike, and pushing the killing intent into his foe. The assassin fell, wide-eyed, and did not stir. They pushed into room, another research facility like the previous one, filled with now cowering researchers, and an assassin scrambling to his feet. Midia didn't give him the chance to attack again, whirling her whip around and cracking it right at the assassin's face. His left eye exploded, and he cried out in pain and rage.
Oh wow, that does feel better,
Midia remarked, feeling the rush of healing energy flow into her from the whip. Knowing they didn't have time to dawdle, she strode past the assassin and blasted him with lightning until he stopped making noise. There, in another transparent cylinder, was Cormu's helmet. She pointed to it.
Open that. Now.
There were no protests. A shivering woman pressed a button, then found a desk to cower under, and the device opened.
You're one scary girl sometimes,
Blades remarked. Chesney smiled, and donned the helmet. His voice was slightly muffled as he said,
You should see her when she's mad.
They then rushed out of the room, checking on the progress of their pursuers. They'd made a lot of ground, and the next tower was a long way off. Not only that, but more soldiers had joined them, not that much farther behind.
What do we do, Wonder Boy?
Fiery asked, her muscles tense and ready to do anything.
We can't stop, no matter what. Keep running.
Down in the bowels of Zagos's temple, a half-dozen men in decorated black uniforms kneeled on the floor in a room lit only by glowing electronic displays. Before them stood Zagos, still wearing his ceremonial robes from the celebration, along with a fully cloaked figure and a few priestesses.
All right, General Cool, how are the Jurain preparations going?
Zagos asked, not looking up from a document he was looking over. One of the figures cleared his throat.
Well, Lord, we're still assembling troops and preparing the forward bases to launch the assault from men.
Zagos's eyes darkened, and he snapped.
What? Why hadn't that been long finished by now? You've had more than enough time. Yes, Lord, you've been extremely generous with your patience with me, and I appreciate it. Only, with the simultaneous attacks from the resistance, our forces are spread thin just now.
Growling, Zagos stepped over to a display behind him, gesturing to a map.
You absolute fool! Do you realize how much this sets us back? Durin was meant to be the launch point of everything. If that's delayed, that means all these troops over here can't move out. Supply shipments, already waiting to be picked up during the marches, are going to rot, which means we need to change our whole supply lines.
Another voice, one of the other generals, spoke up.
Forgive my ignorance, Lord, but perhaps this situation can be salvaged. Now that we have Lokiarn, what need do we have for such an overwhelming force? With him, a much smaller force could easily advance through Durin right away, and we wouldn't need to prepare further.
Zagos pinched the bridge of his nose.
Yes, all I seem to be doing these days is forgiving the ignorance of my subordinate. Lokiarn can't be everywhere, and we need to leave troops behind to hold what we've already taken. Furthermore, I don't want to display our full strength right away. I want them to think they have more of a chance than they do, so they will overcommit. Now, General Talon, remind me.
Zagos was interrupted by the door to the dark chamber being slammed open, and an out-of-breath, feet-oral man running into the room.
How dare you!
The cloaked figure at Zagos' side bellowed, unsheathing a long curved blade and dashing to face the intruder.
This place is a secret meeting.
His sword came easily forward and pressed to the intruder's neck. Shaking, the intruder raised up his hands and stammered,
You urgent news, my lord.
Zagos casually waved the cloaked figure away.
Yes, let's hear it.
The messenger bowed and knelt, averting his eyes.
Lord, the prisoners have escaped.
The room fell completely silent.
They've what?
Zagos yelled, running forward and throwing aside all the generals in his way.
How? When?
Ruthlessly. Zagos grabbed the man's throat and hauled him to his feet.
Explain yourself.
With a hoarse voice, the messenger continued.
I don't know, my lord. We only discovered the cell was empty when a body fell from the top of one of the towers and someone checked. You mean to tell me that one of my elite soldiers fell from the tower and nobody thought it was suspicious enough to tell me until after they checked the cells? And where were the guards? Yes, sir, we've been trying. I've only just gotten past the security protecting the lower areas to reach you.
Zagos threw down the messenger and screamed in rage.
Idiots! Fools! All of you! Useless! And where the hell is Lokiarn?
Cowering on the floor, the messenger managed.
We don't know, Lord. After the battle, nobody has seen him.
Zagos began barking out orders to his generals, then turned to the priestesses.
Round up everyone involved in letting this happen.
Then he waved over to the cloaked figure while he stormed out of the room.
Come with me. I have to deal with this myself.
They'd almost made it to the next tower when disaster struck. A force had been waiting out of sight. Just as they were getting close to the southeast tower, with a wider area to stand and fight on, almost a dozen soldiers and spiritualists poured out of the structure, or from behind it, boxing them in on the narrow walkway between two huge forces. Fiery was kind enough to not mention how they should have fought the first force when they had the advantage.
Well, any ideas now?
She asked.
Fiery, blades, cover us.
Chesney called. To Midia, he whispered.
Follow my lead. Get ready.
Midia held on tight to him, and nodded. Blades stood between the children and the pursuing force, and Fiery stood before the ambushing one, weapons ready. Chesney held his blade up high.
Listen to me. You don't have to die here. Zagos has no idea what he's unleashed, and he's going to destroy the world if Noe Gren isn't stopped. Please, let us pass. Where did you learn to count, boy? We outnumber you almost 10 to 1.
A soldier in black armor shouted over the wind.
This is your last chance. Please.
Chesney said. His voice was full of remorse. The soldier that spoke shook his head exasperatedly.
Enough of this. Take them. Blades. Windstorm. Now.
Chesney yelled, while putting himself right behind Fiery and blasting out his own windstorm in front of her.
Midia, show them what a real master of lightning can do. Fiery. knock down anyone who gets close.
In the blink of an eye, the sky was a storm of screaming winds. Suddenly all of their foes were off balance, being pushed away on the glass walkways, or falling over entirely and scrambling to grab on to anything. Where Medea stood, all winds were still trying to stay stable. She raised her hand, and a massive ball of light formed, pulsing and throwing the world into a contrast of white and black. The noise grew and grew into something painful and piercing, but she pushed more and more of herself into the spell. Her eyes filled with light, and she yelled,
"I'll never let any of you hurt him again. You should have taken our mercy."
She slammed her fist down, and the sky erupted into a rapid-fire barrage of lightning bolts. Every one of their enemies were struck and blown away from the combined force of the winds and her lightning. Every single one was thrown from the walkway, falling to the ground far below, screaming and leaving behind trails of smoke. Fiery was stunned into silence. Even Blades was a little taken aback, standing in awe as he watched their enemies fall to their death.
Wow, okay, that was like the scariest thing I've ever seen.
Medea closed her eyes and took a breath.
Ooh, seeing all them falls making my legs wobbly.
Chesney took her arm in his.
It's okay, you did great. You guys, too. Thanks for being so quick to understand what I was planning. As soon as I saw where we were, I just knew that was the only way out. Would you really have spared them if they let you pass?
Fiery asked.
Of course. I've had enough killing. I know I didn't have a choice. And if I have to, like now, I won't hesitate. But all this war stuff. Fiery, I hate to say it, but Neugrin and Daelgrin are my biggest priority. Now come on, we still have a mission. If sparing them let me do that faster, I would have.
She shook her head, and followed.
Chesney, you can't show these people any mercy. You have no idea the things they'd do if Zagos ordered it. Have done.
He ignored her, and walked with Medea to the tower door. Upon activating it, the door opened to reveal Cormu's armor stood right in front of the door, and a number of scientists cowering against the far wall. His heart nearly skipped a beat when he saw it. He was complete again. A large part of him had despaired of ever being reunited with Cormu's equipment again, feeling like he had made a mistake along the way, and doomed everyone with his ignorance. And having that terrible weight lifted from his shoulders, at being given a second chance, moved him so strongly that his eyes grew wet. But underlying that feeling was knowing that he could no longer run away, either. Whatever destiny was waiting for him now, he would discover today.
Please.
A female researcher said.
Stop him. Destroy that terrible machine. I swear I will.
Chesney said quietly. He closed the door and started putting the armor on.
And that's why I can't just kill everyone. Fiery. If I did, I'd have to start believing everyone here in Sasquatch was just evil. And that's just a really dangerous way to think.
Without even meaning to, he remembered Conchudo. While Medea helped him with the straps, he asked,
Am I wrong, thinking like that? Honestly, I don't know. I've seen some truly awful things here in Sasquatch. I never knew people could be so horrible. It's almost unreal. But I've seen so much compassion too. What it comes down to is, I think I'm a little biased. I can't stop myself from thinking everyone we meet is an enemy, until they prove otherwise. I know that's short-sighted, but I can't help it. I couldn't bear to lose anything else precious to me just from trying to trust. I'll never forget what happened to Joyce, not for as long as I live. Can you?
He looked over to the final tower in the middle of them all, the last one left. He tried to keep the thin, hollow shell of the once vibrant woman from filling his mind.
No, I can't.
They ran towards the final tower, and with every step the air felt more and more thick, with some aura that made their hearts fill with fear, without fully understanding where the feeling truly came from.
Is this what Dahlgren felt like inside?
Medea asked, looking stricken.
No. This is what it felt like looking into Kmat's eyes, or Lokiarn's. But it wasn't turned on when I went inside either.
His heart beat like a hammer against his chest. Suddenly everything became far too real. For so much of the journey, this goal had always seemed so infinitely far away that he never had to really think about if he could really do it. Standing outside the final door, lifting his hand to finally open it, he couldn't quite touch the pad.
Can I really do this? He whispered to himself.
Midia gently placed her hand over his, leaned into his ear, and whispered,
You can do anything.
He closed his eyes, and tried to fill his heart with courage. He thought back to all the destruction and chaos that had filled the world. Thought of all the comrades that had walked beside him to get him here. All the ghosts he had left behind. All the people of the world silently praying for hope.
I can do this. I will do this.
He opened his eyes, and pressed the button with determination. The door opened to darkness and light, and a far too familiar scene. A cavernous room with a million twinkling lights and devices. A display. A keypad. A hand-shaped recess. Watch me, Tail. Watch me, Samsa. A covered conveyor bridged the gap from the door in the wall to a central platform. Countless pipes and wires and sparking spheres with displays all knotted around each other until they all merged into the machine in the middle. Into Nguyen. That feeling of wrongness, of terrible evil, was inescapable. Like walking into a dark alley where you just heard a muffled scream. The kind of place that made your back itch and legs turn to lead and your brain scream at you to run. But the sword was in his hand, gripped tight, eager to cut. They ran across the conveyor to the great central platform. The machine, Nguyen, towered above them, and below them, countless pipes and wires from all over the room mingling and twisting, converging at this one spot. It seemed to almost look at him from the display, sneering at him with all the hate that had gone into its construction, looming darkly over them, daring them to dash their bodies upon the altar of its malice. He couldn't help but associate this moment with the moment of his greatest mistake, and it filled him with anger. Anger at the world, at random circumstance, and at himself. He fueled that anger now, raising his sword in the air, eyes darting to the hand-shaped recess, needing to plunge the sword into the symbol of his mistake. But from high above came a bellowing laugh, deep like it had come from a wide brass gong, its power and tone shaking the air inside their lungs.
Oh, I knew you'd do it. Knew you'd come. When I looked into your eyes, knew all I had to do was wait.
From the shadows above, Lokiarn dropped like an anchor and slammed into the platform between them and Nguyen. Midia's face paled, and Chesney's blood ran cold. It wasn't very often you got to look into the eyes of your murderer a second time.
By Cormu, that thing is huge.
Blade shouted, staring up in awe at the imposing figure. Nevertheless, he twirled the morning star in his hand, and took a stance.
Silence, insect! I speak only to these two.
Lokiarn snapped, its face taking on a rare show of emotion, before returning to the eerie impassiveness as before.
To be honest, Chesney, I was very angry when they took away your things. I wanted to crush you when you were at your strongest. I wanted to see the look in your eyes as you realized you were powerless against me.
His hateful eyes settled on Midia, and she could feel the sheer wave of malice from his aura, and her legs trembled. She hated that she felt scared, looking at the brute.
And you? Such a noble sacrifice you tried to make. What is he, to you? Will he cry and beg if I squeeze the life from you? Will he fight me harder if I break you first? You cheated me last time. You're going to look right at me when I break you. Midia, I want to see it.
Chesney darted in front of her.
Your fight is with me. Lokiarn!
He practically screamed. Lokiarn laughed, that same booming, droning sound like from a great gong. Lokiarn brandished one of his twin swords.
Foolish little boy, playing at being a hero. But the world doesn't work that way. Heroes just die. I'm going to take these swords, and pin you to the wall. Then, I'll take my time with your friends. No. Lokiarn!
Chesney growled, his body filling with anger, the lust for battle, determined now more than ever to make right the things he had done wrong, and to take revenge for how that monster had killed Medea right in front of his own eyes.
You're the fool for coming here and waiting for me. You're going to die. Right here. Right now. By my hand. Yes. Yes, that's it. Show me. Show me how you dare.
Lokiarn yelled, and with impossible speed, dashed forwards into the group. So fast there were after-images of his movement, and swords swinging around looked like he had more than 2 arms. The swords were like thin girders, and so long that it was impossible to stay out of his reach on the platform Noigren was on. Whether they got their shields or guards up or not, it made no difference. The blows were bone-shattering. Medea had never been hit so hard in her entire life, not even when Garuna had pummeled her as viciously as he could. She was driven to the floor easily and smashed against it. Fiery and Blades each took bad cuts across the chest, with blood splattering in showy arcs over the floor. Only Chesney remained standing. The armor of Kormu had incredible protective abilities, but they seemed to barely matter here. But just enough of the force was diverted away to not completely level him. For his trouble, Chesney leapt forward and attacked Lokiarn's side in a strong downward slash. The force of the blow jolted Chesney's arms unexpectedly. Never before had the sword failed to slice through something with almost no effort, but this time it was like trying to slash through a tree with a regular sword. Still, a wound did open up, and golden fluid oozed to fill the void and dripped over the ground. Lokiarn screamed, a real scream that told it was an actual surprise.
H, how dare you? How is that possible?
Chesney sneered.
Oh, is pain new for you? Get used to it. You'll pay for that.
Lokiarn yelled, then took both blades and slammed them down at Chesney. He brought up his shield just in time, but nothing could stop what was coming. Chesney was driven so hard into the floor that the metal deformed, and he actually bounced. He cried out in pain and rolled a few feet, struggling to breathe.
Hey, pick on someone your own size, you big lug!
Blades shouted, running up from behind and knocking his weapon squarely into Lokiarn's back. A terrific gong noise rang out, but there was absolutely no damage. Lokiarn slowly turned, sneered and said,
Pathetic. You want to die, little insect? Let me show you.
Just as he was going to kick out at Blades, a wave of distorted reality assaulted him from the side. Fiery was there, peppering him and dividing his attention. While Lokiarn was distracted, Medea limped to Chesney's side and fed him a pill of ibuprofen.
His strength is monstrous. Yeah, if I take 2 of those kinds attacks in a row, I'm done for a year.
He coughed.
But he's beatable. I know it. I feel it.
She helped him up.
I know there's not much the rest of us can do, but I have a plan. I'm going to take the lead with everyone. You focus on staying even with Lokiarn. Okay, I'll leave it to you.
He yelled, then dashed in front of a blow meant for Fiery and just barely managed to smack it away with his sword. The 2 of them faced off, with Chesney rolling between Blades and making use of Lokiarn's bulk to try to attack him in his blind spots. Medea ran to Fiery and Blades, and used her crown's energy on both. She wanted to save her medicines until it was absolutely necessary. Fiery shook her head, wide-eyed and incredulous.
How in the world are we going to stop that thing? Nothing we can do puts a dent in it.
Before she could even respond, Lokiarn sailed through the group with whirling blade, scattering them like bowling pins. Chesney, wounded, ran after him, slicing open a huge wound on the monster's legs, and drawing the attention of the beast once again.
Fiery, what spirits do you have again?
Medea asked, gasping from the pain.
Earth, heart, and sky.
The plan she had in her head just came together.
Okay, everyone, we're going to do something, and it's going to hurt, but we can't fail.
At their nods, she continued.
You 2, use the buff spells you each have on Chesney. We're going to run straight into the battle, use them on him, and run out. After that, just do whatever you can to distract Lokiarn. Every blow we take is another moment Chesney can win.
Blades blew out a long breath and rolled his shoulders.
You kids are sure making me work for it today. I'm in.
Fiery nodded along too.
You know I'm in this, no matter what. And, if worse comes to worse,
she said, her voice trailing off. Midia noticed the omission, but there was no time to waste. Lokiarn had both his swords in a cross, pressing down on Chedzny, who was trying to block them with his one sword. Slowly, Lokiarn was pressing down harder, trying to force him to fall over or make him slip.
Now!
Midia yelled and ran forward, the other two adults trailing half a step behind her. As one, they ran behind Chedzny and pressed their hands against him.
Stay out of this, you worms!
Lokiarn snarled, and lifted the swords away to slice at them all once again in a whirlwind. They tried to run out of the area, but there was almost nowhere they could go to escape his incredible reach. All of them took bad cuts to their limbs, down to the bone, and their blood pooled together into the grooves of the floor. All except Chedzny. When a sword came crashing down upon him, he yelled and swiped at it with a strong blow of his own, and almost knocked the sword out of Lokiarn's hand.
What?
The great monster yelled.
Now it's my turn.
Chedzny shouted at the top of his lungs, and kicked off the ground, jumping high enough to score a deep gash over Lokiarn's shoulder, and down to his chest. More gold blood poured out, and Lokiarn screamed once more. In response, Lokiarn used the hilt of the other sword to slam into Chedzny while he was still falling. The blow came straight for Chedzny's head, and there was no way to dodge. An indescribable sound filled the air, followed by tinkling sounds, and a hard thud. Dazed, Chedzny couldn't understand what he was feeling, what he was seeing. He couldn't see. Something was in the way, and there was a ringing in his ears. Hands dragged him back. Someone took his helmet off, and he could breathe again. The words were muffled, but he could feel a pill pressed to his lips, and he took it. Instantly, the world snapped back into focus. More tinkling sounds. He looked up to see Midia's terrified face.
See, can you see?
She said.
Yeah. What happened?
He said, not liking the look in her eyes. She just gestured to something, and he turned to look. There was Cormu's helmet, but something was wrong with it. It was cracked almost completely in half, and the visor was completely shattered. Sparkling bits of the clear reflective material it was made of were littered over the ground, and many of them were covered in blood. He wiped his face, and more bloody pieces of shrapnel fell off. Oh gods! He wasn't sure which revelation was more shocking, that Cormu's helmet had been destroyed, or that it had almost left him blind. The idea was almost too startling and impossible to comprehend. That was Cormu's helmet. It can't be broken. Those artifacts have lasted for 10,000 years. But then, it hit him. If Cormu's things are the only things that could destroy Dahlgren, Neugren, Kmat, and Lokiarn, then doesn't it stand to reason they might be able to do the same? What have I done? Then he saw that Blades and Fiery were paying dearly for his absence, and rolled to his feet.
Don't worry about me,
he yelled, running forward.
Keep everyone safe.
There was a time to worry and mourn for what was lost, but it wasn't now. As he ran forward with his sword drawn, he noticed more damage. Cormu's sword had developed several nicks from the times he'd blocked or swatted away Lokiarn's weapons. I can't afford to be careless with my sword here. Lokiarn was leaning down with his blades on blades, his morning star the only thing between them keeping him alive. Chedzny leapt up using his newly given strength and speed, and plunged the sword completely through Lokiarn's arm. The great monster yelled out in pain, which was then doubled as Chedzny twisted the blade, then braced with his feet and pulled the sword free.
Miss me!
Golden blood burst forth like a fountain, and Lokiarn turned his rage upon the boy.
I can kill you at any time, fool. But I will teach you to spare first.
One of his great hands swatted at Chedzny, knocking him off his feet, before Lokiarn dashed towards where Midia was only just getting to her feet. Her arms were still shaking from the terrible wounds Lokiarn had just given them before she had to rush to Chedzny's side. Looking up, she screamed in terror as the towering creature's shadow fell over her, and his two great swords were raised up overhead.
Medea! No!
Chesney screamed, scrambling to follow, but knowing there was no way to get there in time. He watched in horror as the swords came down in a brutal overhead slash, watched as she was struck, and knocked through the air like a rag doll, her blood flying in every direction. In wordless rage, Chesney screamed his denial and leapt at Lokiarn's back, driving his sword just below the shoulder and pulling down with all his strength.
I'll kill you, I'll kill you, I'll kill you.
Bones snapped, flesh was torn, golden blood poured out of the wounds, and Lokiarn gasped and coughed in a rattling wet mess. Like a tornado, he spun quickly and knocked Chesney away while he just managed to hold on to his sword. Lokiarn's normally eerie impassiveness was gone, replaced with a face twisted in some kind of mix of arrogance, disgust, and rage.
It's time I showed you, boy.
Lokiarn yelled, and jumped high into the air, swords pointed down like twin spears. With a thunderous landing, he impaled both points through Cormu's armor, and into Chesney's chest. The armor crackled and smoked, then stopped. Chesney watched helplessly as he couldn't move, pinned to the floor once again, and the terrible pain from the swords and his inability to breathe anymore. Laughing, though weakly, Lokiarn withdrew the swords, and whipped them to throw off the blood that had clung to them.
Hey! Over here, you big stupid idiot!
A voice called. Chesney barely had the perception to recognize it as Fiery. She was bloodied, and staggering, but waving her arms frantically, trying to get Lokiarn's attention. The hulking brute slowly stomped over to her, so he could look down upon her with his disdain.
Well, little woman, you have my attention. How do you want to die?
She wore a tired smile.
Want to see a magic trick?
She brought her one hand up in front of her face, then snapped her fingers. A wave of something exploded from her, and she then fell down like her strings had been cut. When the wave passed over Chesney, his wounds closed up, and he could breathe again. He gasped in deep breaths, in too much pain to do much of anything else, but he frantically grabbed at his pill bottle to take a dose. What was that? Healing magic was just not possible. Everyone knew that. With the exception of Reagan technology, all magic came at the cost of your life, and there was no such thing as healing magic. But, wait, that wasn't entirely true. What had Shakan said? It's called self-defeat. You know how there's no such thing as healing magic? Well, this spell is the one exception. It kills, or nearly kills, the caster, and gives the life energy to their allies. Like I said, I won't be using it. Chesney bolted to his feet, looking at Fiery's body in horror. But, around the platform, the other bodies were stirring. Blades groaned and got to his knees. And, thank Sophie, Medea too coughed and stood. In a blink, she used the power of her shield, and every single wound on her body disappeared. Confusingly she looked around. Then her eyes fell on Fiery's still body.
Fiery? Oh gods, Fiery, what did you do?
Lokiarn sneered.
That little rat.
He kicked her body, and she rolled dangerously close to the edge.
Medea! Focus on right now.
Chesney yelled, running over Lokiarn to keep him from doing anything else to Fiery. He slashed at Lokiarn's arm, but with inhuman speed, Lokiarn stepped back out of the way, and slashed back. Like a pair of practiced ballet dancers, the two traded blows. Chesney, his feet quickened, his arms strengthened, his body toughened, dodged and weaved through the blows he could avoid, and swatted away the ones he could. But with every devastating blow he turned away. He knew that Cormu's sword was reaching its breaking point.
I can't get close. I need an opening.
He screamed, hoping someone could do something to break the stalemate.
We've got you, kid.
Blades yelled, and leapt forward to lock Lokiarn's right arm with his morning star. The next moment, a long whip wrapped around his left arm, and pulled it back. The hulking brute fought and swung his arms viciously to break free.
Now, Chesney! We can't hold him long.
Medea screamed out, voice and body straining to hold back the monster's bottomless power. With every last ounce of strength he could put into his legs, Chesney jumped. He screamed in terror, in desperation, in hope. Leaping just high enough to reach Lokiarn's head, the monster's eyes grew wide in shock as Chesney drew back his sword in an overhand, and plunged in almost hilt deep into Lokiarn's skull. Just before it fully penetrated, the blade snapped off, and Chesney fell down to the ground, carrying only the hilt and a few inches of blade. The hilt sparked and sizzled in his hands, then fell silent. Lokiarn screamed one last time, and the great noise was joined by an indescribable sound coming from all around them. All the spheres and wires and displays around Noigren began to spark and explode, filling the room with smoke. As Lokiarn wobbled and fell, Noigren cracked and the main display exploded. They'd done it. Lokiarn had been defeated, and Noigren was no more. But before any of them even thought to celebrate, they all ran to Fiery's unmoving body, with Medea pressing her hands to her and pushing as much healing energy as she could.
Fiery, please, please don't die,
she begged, her voice tearing. Blades was biting his knuckles in worry, and Chesney propped her up. Seconds ticked by, until finally Fiery gasped in a long breath and rolled onto her hands and knees, coughing up blood. Not even giving her the time to recover, Medea hugged her tightly.
Oh, thank you, Sophie, thank you. Can't get rid of me that easy, kiddo.
Fiery wheezed.
I really could have used that nap, though.
Once she got her feet under her, they all stood and watched as Noigren tore itself apart. She looked at Chesney with awe.
I can't believe it. We did it. No. You did it. You really did it. Yes, he did,
snapped a man's angry voice, and they all turned to see Zagos standing across the covered conveyor, by the door. Beside him was the fully cloaked figure that so often stayed at his side. Zagos was seething with rage.
Do you have any idea how near impossible this thing was to build? It will take me years to even just mine the materials again.
All four of the party looked at one another, and at the platform. There was nowhere to go. The only escape was beyond Zagos. The tall, carved features of Zagos were distorted by his anger into something truly ugly.
I see now I was just a little too greedy, keeping you alive. A mistake I won't make again. You will all die by my hand.
Before any of them could react, Fiery pushed them all back, and ran over the covered conveyor, and blasted it with her break magic, just as she finished crossing. The conveyor shattered, and fell down into the darkness below, completely cutting her off.
Everon, run. I'll stop Zagos. The plan showed a vent behind Noigren, large enough to squeeze through. Now go.
None of them moved.
Fiery, no!
Medea yelled, just as Chesney yelled.
We can't leave you to die.
Zagos had already started swiping at Fiery with huge waves of distortion, while the cloaked figure drew two blades and dashed forward.
Die. Did you forget I have a lot to pay Zagos back for?
She yelled, fighting like her life depended on it.
I'm not going to die here. I'm going to make him pay for my brother.
She was fighting incredibly, keeping out of the cloaked figure's reach and bridging the gap between her and Zagos, only missing him by inches with her poison needle.
Chesney, you still have to stop Dahlgren, don't you? Now go! Go, go, go!
As loath as he was to leave behind anyone in Zagos's hands, Chesney knew there was nothing to be done here. He grabbed Medea's arm, and signaled for Blades to run.
Come on! We need to hurry before this whole place comes down on us.
Grimacing in denial of reality, Medea called Fiery's name again before turning herself, and joining the boys as they ran behind. Noigren! The whole platform was shaking, and the walls were catching fire. Explosions filled the air from every direction. They were running out of time. Just behind the monstrous machine, a dozen gauges and valves were twitching and spiraling madly, but tucked underneath, in the shadows, was a grating that had partially blown off its screws. Blades smashed it with his weapon, and tossed it away.
In,
he yelled, waving them through. Chesney went first, followed by Midia, and then Blades dove through. The inside of the vent was pitch black, but sloped down such that they slid uncontrollably, gaining speed.
Chesney, where are you?
Midia screamed above him, her voice echoing in the closed space.
Here,
he cried, trying to slow himself against the walls of the chute as they sped along faster and faster. The path jerked hard left, and the two of them bashed into each other, before the chute opened up to a wider, yet steeper chutette. They had just enough time to grab each other before the real fun began. The chute's direction tossed them and turned them here and there violently, and it was a miracle they even stayed holding on to each other in the dark. The metal was no longer fully enclosing them either, and above them they could see fires in the dark and sparks and explosions.
Kids, where are you?
Blades yelled, and he sounded far away.
Blades, we're here,
they yelled, but the response came back sounding so weak and distant. Their chute turned steeper and steeper, until at last it disappeared completely, and they were thrown into dark, empty air,